My name is Paige Tanner. I'm 34 years old, and I discovered what my family truly thought about me while lying in a hospital bed. Just 6 weeks before that, I had welcomed my daughter, Nora, into the world. Then everything changed in an instant. A truck ran a red light on fax while I was driving home after a late shift. When I woke up, I had 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung caused by a puncture, and my right arm was wrapped in a cast. My husband, Daniel, was in Seattle, a full 6 hours away from getting home. Someone needed to take care of our newborn daughter that night, and my mother lived only 20 minutes from the hospital. She refused. She said a single sentence to Daniel, and that sentence changed everything. "Your sister never has these kinds of emergencies." My sister was enjoying a Caribbean cruise. My mother was spending her evening at a casino. What happened during the next 3 minutes from that hospital bed ended up affecting the following 9 years and 486,000. But even that wasn't what truly shattered them. The thing that changed everything walked through the hospital door 3 hours later. It was an elderly man carrying a worn-out folder. The words he spoke next were something nobody in my family ever imagined hearing. "Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the place where patient people finally settle old accounts." If you've ever had someone mistake your reliability for an endless supply of favors, this story will feel familiar. Leave a comment and tell me who stood beside you when life knocked you down. And don't forget to subscribe. To understand how this all began, you need to hear about the phone call. I slowly came out of anesthesia in a curtained section of the emergency room. The first thing I noticed was the weight of the cast on my right arm. The second was the plastic hospital band wrapped tightly around my left wrist. A nurse was calling my name in the gentle tone people use when they've already said it several times. Every breath hurt. My ribs felt as if something incredibly heavy was pressing down on my chest. Daniel was on speakerphone beside my pillow. His voice had that careful, controlled sound he gets when he's frightened, but trying hard not to show it. "Paige, the babysitter can't stay after 11. I called your mom." Before he finished, I already knew. "She won't come." There was a brief silence. In the background, I could hear it clearly. Electronic beeps. People talking. The cheerful sounds of slot machines. The little victory tune that plays when someone wins. My mother was at Blackhawk Casino with her friends. She had told Daniel she couldn't come because she needed to watch my sister Megan's cat while Megan was away on a cruise. A cat. My daughter was only 6 weeks old. She needed someone to care for her for one night. And my mother's answer was a cat. I didn't cry. That part matters. Most people expect a woman lying injured in a hospital bed to break down. I didn't. Instead, I stared at the identification band around my wrist. Then, using my left hand, I reached for my phone on the tray table. There were things that needed to be handled. I had always been good at handling things. That was the real issue. You need to understand who I was before that night because it explains why my family treated me the way they did. I grew up in a rented duplex in Aurora where the heating system worked only when it felt like cooperating. I paid my way through community college by working closing shifts at a grocery store. Later, I transferred on a scholarship and fought my way into a finance program that nobody in my family really understood. By the time I was 30, I had become a senior financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company downtown. When important numbers needed to be accurate, I was the person they called. Working with numbers was my career. Numbers don't play favorites. Numbers don't smile while hiding the truth. Unfortunately, not everyone operates that way. Daniel and I got married when I was 26. We decided to wait before having children. Part of that decision was personal, but another part was simple reality. There was always some family problem that needed attention first. We lived modestly without making a big deal about it. 2 incomes. 1 used car. No debt. That quiet financial discipline is the only reason the next part was possible. For 9 years, I had been sending my parents $4,500 every month. I never spoke that number aloud. Not to Daniel. Not to Megan. Not to anyone. I convinced myself it was necessary because of my father's heart condition and their mortgage payments. I told myself I was the only person dependable enough to carry the responsibility. Over time, being the dependable one became part of who I was. Looking back, I can see the truth. I wasn't naive. I wasn't foolish. I was responsible to the point that I stopped considering my own needs. Those are not the same thing. And that night, I finally understood the difference. The first thing I did wasn't about revenge. The first thing I did was solve the immediate problem. That's what I had always done. Using my left thumb. I searched for the number of a licensed overnight childcare agency, Daniel, and I had researched before Nora was born but never needed. A woman answered on the second ring. I explained who I was, what had happened, and where I lived. 9 short sentences. Calm. Direct. Almost routine. Then I said, I need a night nurse for a 6-week-old baby tonight, starting immediately. The woman on the phone asked a simple question. Is the baby medically stable? She's perfect, I replied. I'm the one in the hospital. Just 40 minutes later, a night nurse named Yvette arrived at our house using the security code Daniel had provided. After washing her hands, she sent me a picture of Nora peacefully asleep, one tiny fist resting against her cheek. I stared at that photo for a long time. The ER nurse standing nearby watched me put my phone down and gently asked whether any family members were coming to help. It's taken care of, I said. Then I added, what's next? She blinked. People often do that when you don't react the way they expect. They prepare themselves for tears, panic, or anger, and when none of that appears, they don't quite know what to do. I wasn't being distant. I was prioritizing. When you've spent your entire life being the most dependable person in every room, that's what happens. My daughter was safe. She was warm, protected, and being cared for. My husband was on his way home. My injuries would heal. That left only one thing on my list. One issue I had carried for 9 years without ever forcing myself to examine it too closely. Now I had nothing but time, one working hand, and a very clear mind. I opened my banking app. The login screen glowed softly in the dark hospital bay. Once inside, I navigated to a section labeled Recurring Transfers. There were 4 entries. I knew every one of them by memory. The way people remember old scars. The first transfer was labeled Mom and Dad, $2,000 a month. The second, Home, $1,100. That payment was supposed to help with the mortgage. The third, Dad Medical, $900. The fourth, Megan Support, $500. Together, they totaled $4,500 every month. For 108 months. I had created the first transfer when I was 25 after my father called me in tears about medical expenses. After that, the payments simply continued. Month after month. Year after year. And I never allowed myself to calculate the total amount. Because once I knew the total, I would have to face what it meant. That night, I finally looked. The app calculated everything instantly. $486,000. Nearly $500,000. Gone. Not through dramatic decisions or reckless spending. Just through quiet automatic transfers, month after month, while my mother told relatives that they managed everything on their own. I pressed cancel on the first transfer. A green confirmation checkmark appeared, along with a sentence I will never forget. Recurring transfer canceled. I canceled the second. Then the third. Then the fourth. 4 taps. Less than 20 seconds. And 9 years ended. It felt surprisingly ordinary. Like turning off a faucet that had been running so long you barely noticed the sound anymore. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I simply felt clear. The way you feel when a set of numbers finally balances exactly the way it should. As I prepared to close the app, something caught my attention. A transaction hidden deep in the history. I had never noticed it before. It sat beneath the category marked Dad Medical. The transaction was from 2 years earlier. The description read, Loan M, $40,000. M. Not Dad. Megan. Not surgery. Not medical care. Megan. I locked my phone and stared into the darkness. The monitor beside me continued counting each heartbeat. And for the first time in 9 years, I allowed myself to consider a question I had always avoided. Why had I done all of this? Most people would say it was because I desperately wanted approval. Because I couldn't say no. Because I was a pushover. But that explanation isn't accurate. Anyone who has spent years being the responsible one already understands the truth. I did it because I convinced myself that being needed meant being secure. As long as everyone depended on me, I believed I couldn't be pushed aside. If I carried the weight, I would always matter. My grandmother understood that long before I did. Her name was Ruth. She was my mother's mother. A tall, tough woman who always smelled faintly of coffee and machine oil. She never needed to raise her voice to command attention. People simply listened when she spoke. The Thanksgiving before she passed away, she squeezed my hand and told me something I never forgot. Someone has to keep an eye on this family's money. Your mother won't do it, so that responsibility falls to you. At the time, I thought she meant I should be generous. Looking back now, I think she meant something very different. I think she meant I needed to be careful, alert, protective. Ruth died peacefully last spring in her sleep. At the time, I was overwhelmed by a difficult work quarter and preparing for my pregnancy. I never asked many questions about her estate or who inherited what. I simply assumed my mother handled everything properly. The same way I assumed my money was paying for my father's treatment. For most of my life, I had made a habit of believing the best about people who had done nothing to earn that trust. I called that love. Lying in that hospital bed, with my daughter being cared for by a stranger 40 minutes away, I finally saw the truth. I hadn't been supporting my actual family. I had been supporting an idea of my family. The reality was very different. The real family had just chosen a cat over my child. A little later, Daniel called again during a layover. This time he repeated every word my mother had said. Exactly. He knew I would want the details exactly as they happened. At 9 o'clock, he had called her. He explained that I was in surgery. He explained that Nora needed someone to stay with her. He asked if she could simply drive the 20 minutes to our house. According to Daniel, my mother let out one of her familiar dramatic sighs before answering. She said she couldn't. Megan was finally enjoying her dream vacation. Someone had to watch the cat. Then she added something else. Besides, Paige always lands on her feet. As if getting hit by a truck was just another inconvenience. As if my daughter's first night without her mother wasn't important. As if a cruise schedule mattered more than a family emergency. Then came the sentence that stayed with me. Your sister never has these emergencies. As though accidents somehow checked family rankings before happening. As though tragedy politely followed a schedule. I could hear Daniel struggling to keep his composure as he repeated her words. His voice cracked. He was angry, hurt, disappointed. But I told him to take a breath. I reminded him that Nora was safe. I told Daniel not to worry. I told him Nora was safe. I told him I was okay. And I told him to get on the plane. After we ended the call, I opened Instagram, something I rarely bothered with. At the very top of my feed was Megan's latest story. A sparkling video of a turquoise pool, bright sunshine, and a coconut drink balanced perfectly beside a lounge chair. Across the screen was a caption. Living my best life finally. That was my sister. 29 years old. An aspiring influencer with 11,000 followers and a $500 monthly allowance she assumed simply appeared from nowhere. I didn't leave a comment. I didn't vent my frustration. Instead, I opened my messages and sent a text to a contact I almost never used. The contact was saved as Grandpa H. I typed only 3 words. We should talk. The typing indicator appeared almost immediately. It was as though he'd been waiting years to receive that message. Maybe he had. I expected a text response. Instead, my phone started ringing. FaceTime. The caller was Megan. From somewhere in the middle of the Caribbean. I answered using my left hand. My hospital room was dimly lit, half my face hidden in shadow. Megan didn't notice any of it. She didn't notice the hospital ceiling. She didn't notice the cast. She didn't ask why I was lying down in bed close to midnight. Paige, finally, she said. She was holding the phone so close that most of what I could see was her sunburned nose. My card got declined at the spa. It was so embarrassing. I said nothing. As usual, she rushed in to fill the silence herself. Mom said the family account always covers me. Did you change something? And there it was. One sentence. One sentence that exposed the entire lie. The family account. My sister honestly believed that her monthly $500 came from some shared Reynolds family fund. Some invisible account managed by our mother. She had absolutely no idea the money came from me. My mother had spent 9 years making sure she never found out. I asked calmly, "Do you know I was in a car accident?" "What?" She looked confused, then annoyed. "Are you being dramatic right now?" Behind her, a steel drum band started playing. "Can you just fix the card? We dock in Cozumel tomorrow and I have a shoot." A shoot. I told her I'd look into it. Which was technically true. Then I told her I needed to go. That was true too. I ended the call before she could say anything else. Then I lay quietly in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of steel drums echoing in my mind. The truth was, Megan wasn't intentionally cruel. Not exactly. In some ways, that made it worse. She had lived her entire life believing resources simply appeared when she needed them. Nobody had ever asked her to think about where they came from. Nobody had ever shown her who was carrying the weight behind the scenes. The next morning, I was transferred into a standard hospital room. That's when the family group chat exploded. My phone kept buzzing on the tray table. The chat was called Reynolds Family. There were about a dozen relatives in it. Mostly aunts. Mostly people who rarely spoke. I usually ignored the group. But the notifications kept coming. Against my better judgment, I opened it. My mother had been busy. An hour earlier, she had posted a long message that began with, "I'm heartbroken to say that Paige is being dramatic again and has decided to cut off her struggling parents out of spite." I kept reading. She talked about my father's fragile health. She reminded everyone how much they had sacrificed for me. She claimed she didn't know how they would afford his medications anymore. Then she added a line clearly written for an audience. "We've always managed on our own. But this is cruel." There it was again. The same lie, just in a different place. The same screen. The same story. Except this time it wasn't my banking app. It was a public performance. "We've always managed on our own." For 9 years she had repeated that sentence to relatives while collecting my transfers every month without fail. My Aunt Carol had already responded. 3 broken heart emojis. Then, shame on her. Kicking a sick man while he's down. A cousin added praying hands. Others offered sympathy. Nobody in that chat knew the truth. Because the truth had never been allowed inside. I stared at the screen. For a moment, the familiar urge returned. The urge to explain. To defend myself. To smooth things over. To manage everyone's emotions the same way I had managed every other problem in my life. Then I put the phone face down. That version of me was gone. The woman who explained herself was gone. The woman who carried everyone else was gone. The woman lying in that hospital bed wanted something different. She wanted facts. She wanted records. She wanted numbers. And I knew exactly where to find them. At 11 the next morning, Daniel walked into my room. He looked exhausted. His face was unshaven. His skin had that gray, drained look people get after too little sleep and too much worry. One shoulder carried a diaper bag. The other carried responsibility. And in his hands was Nora's car seat. He had flown home, relieved Yvette, packed everything up, and driven straight to the hospital. He set the carrier beside my bed. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. At the cast. At the bruises spreading across my jaw. At the damage. His eyes immediately filled with tears. I told him not to, because if he started crying, I would too. And I still had things to do. Carefully, he lifted Nora from her seat. Mindful of my injured ribs, he laid her gently against my chest. For a few precious moments, nothing else mattered. No family drama. No money. No lies. Just the 3 of us breathing together. Even now, that's the only part of that week I would willingly relive. Then my phone rang. It was my father, Roy Reynolds, 64 years old. The man whose medical expenses I believed I had been supporting for 9 years. When I answered, his voice sounded weak, unsteady. "Paige," he said, using the childhood nickname he hadn't spoken in years. I didn't know it had gotten this bad. He was talking about everything. The accident. The money. The situation. I didn't know. For a moment, I truly believed he might finally do it. Might finally stand up for himself. Might finally stand up for me. I never wanted you carrying all of this, he said. Then he paused. I could hear him taking a breath. The kind of breath someone takes right before making a difficult choice. And for one brief second, I thought he was about to tell the truth. Then I heard my mother's voice in the background. Sharp. Controlled. Demanding. She asked who he was speaking with. The lines suddenly became muffled. A hand covering the phone. A private conversation happening somewhere beyond my hearing. When my father returned, everything had changed. His voice sounded smaller. Retreated. Defeated. I should go, he said quietly. Feel better. Then he hung up. That single phone call explained my father perfectly. He wasn't a bad man. He never had been. He was simply a man who had spent 40 years learning that in his house, the safest choice was to stay silent. And after enough years, silence becomes a habit that feels impossible to break. That afternoon, Daniel brought my laptop to the hospital. He positioned it on the rolling tray table beside my bed, and I turned to the one thing that has always helped me regain control when life feels chaotic. I built a spreadsheet. Working slowly with my left hand, I logged into my bank account, downloaded 9 years of statements, and imported everything into a pivot table. This is the kind of work I do every day for a company worth billions of dollars. Surely I could do the same for my own finances. I began organizing the data, not by what I had been told, by where the money had actually gone. As the numbers sorted themselves, a completely different story started to emerge. The picture forming on my screen looked nothing like the one my mother had spent years presenting to relatives. The mortgage payments I believed I had been helping cover? They hadn't been made 108 times. They had been made only 10 times in 9 years. Then I examined my father's medical expenses. The real ones. Cardiology appointments. Prescription medications. Documented treatment costs. Altogether, they totaled roughly $65,000 across the entire period. I stared at the screen, because that left a very important question. Where had the remaining $421,000 gone? I kept digging. Next, I filtered transactions by withdrawal locations and dates. Immediately, a pattern appeared. A large one. Hundreds of cash withdrawals. Small amounts. Consistent amounts. And nearly all of them clustered within a 2-mile radius of a single zip code. I opened a map. The zip code belonged to Blackhawk. At that moment, another piece fell into place. My mother hadn't simply happened to be at a casino the night she refused to help her granddaughter. That wasn't an isolated event. According to the records, she had been spending time there regularly for almost a decade. And she had been doing it with money that came from me. The same money she claimed she never needed. The same money she accepted while telling everyone she managed perfectly fine on her own. Then I noticed something else. A second stream of money. Smaller. More organized. More intentional. I followed it year by year. It led directly to Megan. I leaned back carefully, as much as my injured ribs would allow. Then I stopped trying to interpret the numbers emotionally. I simply let them speak for themselves. Because numbers have one advantage over people. They don't lie. I want to share the exact figures because everything that happened afterward depends on them. Out of the total $486,000, approximately $65,000 went toward legitimate medical care for my father. About $11,000 was actually used on the mortgage. That left roughly $410,000 without a valid explanation. And that money split into 2 very clear categories. The first category totaled around $290,000 over 9 years. It consisted of cash withdrawals made near Blackhawk. The amounts were small enough individually that they never looked suspicious. But together they formed a very different story. The second category totaled approximately $120,000. And every trail pointed toward Megan. That amount included the transaction labeled Loan M for $40,000. The same payment that had been hidden under my father's medical category. The same payment I originally believed was connected to surgery. It wasn't. It was money given to my sister. Money nobody expected her to repay. Later, I discovered exactly what some of it had funded. A year focused on building her personal brand. A leased SUV. A professional photographer in Tulum. The evidence couldn't have been clearer. I printed the results. 1 page. 1 clean summary. 12 rows. 9 years of financial history condensed into a document simple enough for anyone to understand. Then Daniel showed me something else. While monitoring the family group chat, he had saved a screenshot. It was a message my mother had sent to Aunt Carol long before any of this came to light. The message read, "We covered Megan's brand ourselves. That's what good parents do. We covered it ourselves." I looked at the screenshot. Then I looked at the printed summary sitting beside me. And something inside me became very still. Very calm. I wasn't interested in sending angry messages. I wasn't interested in defending myself. I wasn't interested in arguing. Instead, I wanted one thing. I wanted the facts to enter the room. The same room where my mother had spent 9 years performing for an audience. The same audience that had only ever heard her version of events. I would let the numbers speak. And then I would leave. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just permanently. And I would never finance the performance again. "It's handled," I told Daniel. This time, the words felt different. They no longer sounded like crisis management. They sounded like a final decision. Before I continue, I want to pause for a moment. Because some of you reading this may recognize yourselves in what I'm describing. For 9 years, I believed I was helping pay for my father's heart treatments. In reality, I was helping fund casino visits and influencer photo shoots. If you've ever sent money to someone because you trusted them, do yourself a favor tonight. Pull up a single bank statement. Just one. Then read it as if it belongs to someone else. Look only at the facts. Not the explanations. Not the promises. Not the emotions. Sometimes the truth is sitting there in plain sight, waiting for you to finally look at it. If this story is feeling uncomfortably familiar, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. The next chapter begins with my grandfather walking into that hospital room. What he told me while I was lying in that bed completely changed the way I saw my mother. My mother noticed the missing transfers the same way she notices most things. Only when they affect her. The first day of the month arrived. No money appeared in her account. By noon, my phone was lighting up with her name. I ignored the first call. Then the second. When the third came through, I answered. Avoiding difficult conversations belonged to the old version of me. Her voice arrived sweet and warm. The version she reserves for relatives, neighbors, and restaurant servers. "Honey, are you okay? We've been so worried about you and the baby." Worried. The woman who chose a cat over her granddaughter. "I'm recovering," I said. "Thank you." A short pause followed. I could practically hear her adjusting her strategy. Then the warmth slowly disappeared. Underneath it was the tone I had known my entire life. I noticed the account payment didn't come through. Was there a problem with the bank? I told her there wasn't. Silence. Then came the guilt. Right on schedule. After everything your father and I sacrificed for you. We drove you to every practice. We kept a roof over your head. I let her continue. I knew the routine. Eventually, she returned to the one line that had always worked before. This time she said it softly, almost as though she were the injured party. "You know, your sister never has these emergencies." The third time. 3 days. Same sentence. But this time something was different. I didn't defend myself. I didn't react. I simply said, "I know, Mom." And I meant something entirely different than she did. Megan never had emergencies because she had spent years protected from consequences. Megan never had emergencies because I had been handling them before they happened. Now she had a declined card. A leased SUV she couldn't afford. And no idea why. I told my mother I needed to feed Nora. Then I hung up while she was still talking. In 34 years, I had never done that before. When my mother doesn't get the results she wants, she sends reinforcements. That afternoon, Aunt Carol texted me directly. I could count on one hand how many times she had contacted me during my adult life. Twice had been to ask me to buy raffle tickets. This message was different. It was several paragraphs of secondhand outrage. "I am disgusted. Your parents are struggling. Your father is sick. How could you cut them off now?" Then came the sentence designed to hurt. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. And for a moment, it almost worked. Because Ruth was the one person whose opinion had always mattered to me. Then I remembered what she had actually said. Not what others claimed she would say. What she had really said. Somebody has to watch this family's money, and your mother won't. Suddenly, I realized Carol had everything backward. So I didn't send a long explanation. I didn't defend myself. I didn't apologize. Instead, I attached a single document. 1 page. 12 rows. 9 years of numbers. Then I added one sentence underneath. Here's where the money your sister-in-law claims she manages on her own actually went. The Blackhawk withdrawals belong to her. Ask her. Then I set my phone aside and changed Nora's diaper with one hand. More calmly than I had felt in years. A notification appeared. Carol was typing. The little dots blinked on the screen. Then they disappeared. No message followed. Not that afternoon. Not the next day. Nothing. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table staring at 12 rows of facts she couldn't argue with. Because that's the thing about numbers. People can call you emotional. They can call you bitter. They can call you dramatic. But they can't call a bank statement dramatic. It simply exists. It doesn't argue. It doesn't defend itself. It just tells the truth. For years, I had managed everyone's emotions. Now I was learning something new. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is present the facts and allow people to sit with them. My mother, however, was not finished. She never runs out of strategies. When kindness failed and guilt failed and Aunt Carol failed, she moved to the stage she controlled best. The family gathering. A group message appeared in the Reynolds family chat. Written in her favorite role, the wounded family matriarch. Let's all get together Sunday to welcome baby Nora and clear the air. Then she added, Paige, I hope you'll come so we can put this misunderstanding behind us. A misunderstanding. 5 days after refusing to help my newborn daughter. 5 days after choosing a cat. Now it was a misunderstanding. Daniel read the message over my shoulder. You don't have to go, he said. We can stay home with Nora and let them deal with the consequences. He was right. I didn't have to go. But I also knew exactly what Sunday was really about. It wasn't about welcoming Nora. It wasn't about healing relationships. It was about getting me into a room full of relatives. A room full of pressure. A room full of expectations. My mother wanted an audience while she convinced me to restart the payments. She wanted the familiar ending. The one where I gave in. The one where everyone left comfortable. The one where nothing changed. She wanted an audience for my surrender. Instead, I decided to give her an audience for something else. I replied with 2 words. We'll come. Then I put my phone down and felt something unexpected. For the first time, it felt as though the trap had closed around the wrong person. Later that day, I called Grandpa Harold. We talked for 40 minutes. Near the end of the conversation, he asked me one question. His voice was rough and steady. You want this quiet, or you want it true? I looked at Nora sleeping peacefully in my healthy arm. I looked at the life I had nearly sacrificed trying to support a lie. And I answered immediately. True. There was a brief pause. Then he said, Good. I'll bring the folder. I didn't ask what was inside. Somehow I already knew. Whatever was in that folder was going to end this. For good. Now I need to go back for a moment. Because the event that changed everything happened before that family dinner. It happened 3 hours after I canceled the transfers. The night of the accident. While Daniel was still flying home. My hospital room door opened slowly. And Grandpa Harold walked in. He was 78. Tall despite his age. Wearing a neatly pressed flannel shirt buttoned all the way to his collar. He moved carefully with a cane he clearly disliked needing. I hadn't told him which hospital I was in. Later I learned he had called every major hospital nearby until he found me. Under one arm he carried a thick manila folder. The corners were worn soft from age. 2 old rubber bands crossed over the top. Stretched thin and pale from years of use. He carried it carefully. Like something important. Something heavy. He placed it at the foot of my bed. Then he looked at me. Really looked. At the cast. At the bruises. At the damage. His jaw tightened. Your mother told me you were in a minor accident, he said. A fender bender. He shook his head. I passed 3 highway exits before I realized she was lying. Then he sat down, folded both hands over the top of his cane, and said something I will never forget. I knew. I stared at him. Knew what? His eyes moved to the folder. Not to me. The money. All 9 years. Where your mother spent her afternoons. What she told everyone while you were draining yourself dry. Then he tapped the folder once. But not tonight. You've got enough on your plate tonight. We'll do this properly. In front of everybody. Where she can't walk away from it. He was right. Some truths deserve witnesses. Before leaving, he shared one piece of the story. Just enough to make sure I wasn't walking into Sunday blind. He told me about my grandmother. About Ruth. The story I had been told wasn't the complete story. Yes, she passed away peacefully. But during her final year, she had become suspicious. She noticed the casino visits. She noticed the spending. She noticed things that didn't add up. And unlike everyone else, she started asking questions. One evening she told Harold, "Someone is keeping Linda afloat. And it isn't us. Find out who." It took him time. Banks weren't eager to share information. And he wasn't a young man. But Harold had spent 40 years managing financial records for cattle operations. He knew how to follow money. Eventually, he found the answer. He found me. He found 9 years of transfers. 9 years of a granddaughter quietly financing a problem her mother kept making larger. According to Harold, Ruth wanted to fix it herself. But she ran out of time. So she did something else. Something she believed would protect me after she was gone. He wouldn't tell me all the details yet. Not then. But he did tell me this. During her final months, Ruth met with an attorney. More than once. Whatever she created carried both her signature and Harold's. An attorney in Boulder believed it would stand. Legally. Securely. In this state, Harold told me, a trust can be written the way we wrote ours. And when it's written properly, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. Then he stood, picked up the folder, and stopped at the doorway. Before leaving, he looked back at me. Your mother may say a lot of things on Sunday, but hear this clearly. Ruth was never ashamed of you. She trusted you. She trusted you with everything. That's why she chose you. Then he left. And I didn't sleep at all that night. The day before the dinner, Harold stopped by the house. We sat together while Nora slept nearby. Finally, I asked the question that had followed me for most of my life. Why Megan? Why did Mom spend decades treating one daughter like a treasure and the other like a tool? Harold sat quietly for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly between his hands. Finally, he spoke. To understand Linda, you first have to understand how Ruth raised her. I felt myself tense. Because I loved Ruth deeply. And I wasn't ready to hear something complicated about her. Harold sighed. Then he said, Ruth was a strong woman. And the way he said it told me the story was about to become much more complicated than I had ever imagined. Ruth was a tough woman, Harold said. Fair most of the time. But tough. He stared into his coffee for a moment before continuing. And she had a favorite. I looked up. It wasn't your mother. He shook his head. It was your Uncle Danny. God rest him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Linda grew up being the responsible one, Harold continued. The one who handled things. The one expected to keep everything together. Danny got the attention. Danny got the affection. The words hit harder than I expected. Because I knew exactly what that felt like. I had lived that role myself. So when Linda had you, Harold said, and you turned out quiet, dependable, and capable, just like she'd been, something inside her couldn't stand seeing it. He set down his coffee cup. Then Megan came along. His voice softened. Megan was loud, needy, bright. She demanded attention. He sighed. And your mother finally got to be the parent of the favorite instead of the forgotten child. The room felt very still. She got to give Megan what she always wished she'd received herself. He rubbed a hand across his face. That doesn't excuse any of it. It just explains the shape of it. I sat with those words for a long time. My mother wasn't some cartoon villain. She wasn't evil for the sake of being evil. She was a woman who had once been the overlooked child in her own home. But instead of ending the pattern, she repeated it. She made me the dependable one. And she turned Megan into the favorite. The cycle continued, just with different names. The casino? I asked. Harold nodded. The casino was the one place she felt she might win something without having to earn it. I understood that. More than I wanted to. And I was still finished. Understanding someone doesn't require sacrificing yourself for them. That night I decided exactly what Sunday would be. And what it would not be. It would not become a shouting match. I had watched my mother win those for decades. She was an expert at them. The moment I raised my voice, she would become the victim and I would become the unstable daughter. The audience would see exactly what she wanted them to see. So I refused to give her that. I wasn't bringing noise. I was bringing evidence. That was the difference. My mother's power came from stories. From guilt. From carefully crafted emotions. From narratives repeated so often people stopped questioning them. My power came from documents. A printed page. A screenshot. A folder carried by an old man who had spent a year preparing for this moment. She would perform. I would present facts. She would offer feelings. I would offer proof. And we would do it in front of the exact audience she had assembled. That evening, while Nora slept nearby, I explained my plan to Daniel. I'm not going to argue with her, I said. I'm going to walk in, put the truth on the table, and let it speak for itself. He looked at me carefully. Can you stay calm? I thought about every family dinner, every check, every compromise, every time I managed someone else's emotions instead of stating a simple truth. Then I smiled. I've been calm my entire life. I paused. I just stopped being silent. Those are not the same thing. And somehow it had taken a truck accident, a hospital stay, a cast, and a grandfather carrying a folder to teach me that. Before bed, I slipped my printed summary into Nora's diaper bag beneath the wipes. No one would think to look there. Saturday afternoon. Megan called from the airport after returning from her cruise. The conversation told me exactly how little her world had changed while mine had completely shifted. The trip was basically ruined, she announced. No hello. No concern. No asking how I was feeling. I spent the entire cruise stressed about my card. She sighed dramatically. Do you know how embarrassing it is getting declined in front of people? I said nothing. Naturally, she continued. Mom says you had some kind of breakdown and turned off the family money. A pause. Fine. Have your feelings. But I have a launch coming up, and I literally can't function without that account. Then came the sentence that perfectly captured everything. Can you just fix it before dinner tomorrow so we don't have to make a big deal out of this? Fix it. As if almost dying in a car accident was a scheduling issue. As if abandoning a newborn was a misunderstanding. As if the entire thing was a minor inconvenience disrupting her plans. Finally, I asked a question. Just one. Megan, where do you think that money comes from? Silence. Real silence. Maybe the first genuine silence I'd ever heard from her. Mom and Dad? She answered. But it sounded uncertain. The words lifted upward at the end. More question than answer. The first crack. The first hint of doubt. It's just family money, she added weakly. I told her I would see her tomorrow. Then I ended the call. Some lessons can't be explained. They have to be witnessed. Sunday arrived. We drove to my parents' house. The same house whose mortgage I believed I had been helping pay. When we pulled into the driveway, I sat quietly for a moment, gathering myself. The cast was still on my arm. The hospital ID band still circled my wrist. 5 days old now. Worn soft and faded. I had kept it intentionally. Before getting out of the car, I removed it. Then tucked it into my coat pocket. I wanted it with me. A small reminder. A piece of evidence. Proof of exactly where I had been when my mother chose a cat over her granddaughter. Daniel lifted Nora's car seat. Then I heard a familiar sound behind us. The steady tap of a cane. Harold. Dressed in his Sunday flannel. The worn manila folder tucked under one arm. The brittle rubber bands still wrapped around it. He had intentionally driven separately. He didn't want my mother seeing us arrive together. He didn't want her preparing a defense. You ready? He asked. Through the front window, I could already see everyone gathered inside. Aunt Carol, two cousins, my father, Megan, and my mother, moving around the room serving coffee and playing hostess. The queen of a kingdom I had financed for nearly a decade. "I'm ready," I said. And for once, I truly meant it. Harold nudged the door open with his cane. The three of us stepped inside. 3 generations carrying the things my mother least wanted in that room. A baby, a cast, an old hospital band, and a folder. Conversation stopped immediately. My mother turned around, coffee pot in hand, smile already prepared. The performance began. To her credit, she started strong. She set the coffee pot down dramatically, pressed a hand against her chest, then hurried toward Nora with tears already forming. "Oh, there's my precious grandbaby." She reached for the carrier. Daniel calmly shifted it away. Not aggressively, not rudely, just firmly. The failed reach became an awkward flutter. Then Act 1 began. My mother turned toward the relatives. Not toward me, toward the audience. "I'm just so grateful we're all together," she said, voice trembling perfectly. "This has been the hardest week of my life. The hardest week of her life. Not mine. Not the woman in the hospital bed." She explained how her daughter had suffered a little accident. Thank goodness. Then she explained how that same daughter had supposedly punished her struggling parents over imagined grievances. She dabbed at her eyes. Aunt Carol nodded automatically, but I noticed she avoided looking directly at me. The spreadsheet was still sitting somewhere in the back of her mind. My father stared at the floor. Megan looked confused, like someone who had walked into a play without receiving a script. Then my mother delivered her favorite line, the one that had worked for decades. Turning toward me with wounded eyes, she asked, "I don't understand where this cruelty comes from." Then, "Your sister never has these emergencies." The fourth time. The fourth time in 1 week. And in front of an entire room of witnesses. She had no idea she had just handed me exactly what I needed. Everyone waited. For tears. For shouting. For a fight. Instead, I reached into the diaper bag, under the wipes, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I didn't stand. I didn't give a speech. I unfolded it, smoothed it against my leg with my good hand, then placed it in the center of the dining table. The overhead light fell directly across it. Finally, I looked at my mother and spoke in the same calm voice I used during financial presentations. "You're right, Mom." The room leaned in. "Megan never has these emergencies." I slid the paper toward the center. "I'd like everyone to see why." Silence. I continued. "This page shows every dollar I sent this family over the last 9 years. 486,000. The room froze. Even Aunt Carol leaned forward. "The first entries are legitimate. 65,000 for Dad's medical care, cardiologists, prescriptions, treatment." I paused, then pointed lower. "About 11,000 toward the mortgage." Another pause. Then, "The rest is where Mom says she manages everything herself." I guided their attention. 290,000 withdrawn near the casino in Black Hawk over 9 years. A quiet gasp moved through the room. The sound people make when a story suddenly stops making sense. And approximately 120,000 went to Megan. I looked at my sister, including the 40,000 hidden under Dad's surgery expenses. Megan slowly lifted her head. Confused. Shocked. Hurt. "That's where your card money came from, Meg." My voice stayed gentle, because this part wasn't really her fault. It came from me. It always came from me. The performance collapsed. There was nowhere for it to go. The tears remained, but now they were simply tears. Not evidence. Not proof. Just tears. I looked directly at my mother, without raising my voice, without anger, without emotion. "It's handled." 2 words. 3 days of heartbreak. 9 years of silence. And somehow everything fit inside those 2 words. My mother opened her mouth. I could see exactly what was coming. Denial. Accusations. Drama. The usual strategy. "That's twisted," she snapped. "You've twisted everything. Your father and I never." She never finished. Because at that moment Harold stepped forward. He leaned his cane against the table, then carefully placed the manila folder beside my spreadsheet. The room watched. The old rubber bands came off slowly. They had been wrapped around that folder for years. Harold opened it, patiently, deliberately. Then he spoke. For the first time all evening. I knew. His voice wasn't loud, yet everyone heard him. I always knew. He wasn't speaking to my mother. He was speaking to the room. Ruth knew too. Toward the end, she had me trace everything. He pulled out a thick legal document. The logo of a Boulder law firm sat on the cover. This is the trust Ruth and I created. The room stared. Last spring, we transferred most of our assets into it. The land. The accounts. This house. He let that settle. Then delivered the sentence that changed everything. It does not go to Linda. Linda does not control a single dollar. For the first time all evening. He looked directly at my mother. Not angrily. Just honestly. We left it to Paige. And to Nora. There is an education fund for Nora. The rest remains protected exactly the way Ruth wanted. He tapped the document. Where it can't be gambled away. Then. My attorney says it stands. We made sure it stands. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother's mask disappear completely. No performance. No tears. No wounded innocence. Only panic. Because in one moment she lost control of the story. And when people looked around the room now, they weren't looking at me. They were looking at her. And that's when everything changed forever.